For 3 years, the world has argued, theorized, and fought online about what really happened the day FBG Duck lost his life on Oak Street. But nobody expected his own mother to break her silence like this. And what she revealed. It changes everything fans thought they knew about King Von's role in that entire situation. The streets are buzzing, social media is exploding, and the people closest to Duck are saying this is the moment the truth finally ripped through years of rumors, half-stories, and carefully constructed lies. This isn't another blog post. This isn't another Twitter thread. This is a mother who has finally had enough. It started with a simple post, one she uploaded at 2 a.m. and deleted within minutes. But screenshots spread so fast the internet couldn't keep up. And inside those words was the most painful, most shocking accusation she has ever made. Not just about who pulled the trigger, but about who knew, who planned, and who stayed silent while her son bled on a Chicago sidewalk. For years, fans debated whether it was retaliation, a setup, or a random street collision turned deadly. But Duck's mom says the truth wasn't random at all. It was calculated. It was coordinated. And King Von's name is sitting right in the center of it. Tonight, we break down everything she revealed. The moment Duck's mom broke her silence, the whole internet froze. Not because she posted something flashy, not because she named names in a long caption, but because her words carried a kind of pain that only a mother can carry. The kind that makes people stop scrolling, stop arguing, and just sit with what they're reading. She wasn't performing grief for an audience. She wasn't looking for sympathy. She was done being the one person in this entire story who stayed quiet while everybody else talked. For 3 years, the world only saw pieces of what happened. Surveillance footage, court transcripts, bloggers running hot takes within hours of the shooting, rappers dropping records and subliminals, fans building entire theories on 4 seconds of shaky cell phone video. Everybody had a version of the story, everybody except the one woman who had the most right to tell it. Duck's mother watched all of it from a distance, in silence, and people assumed that silence meant she was broken. It didn't. It meant she was paying attention. She didn't stay quiet out of fear. She didn't stay quiet because someone told her to. According to people extremely close to her, she made a deliberate decision in the weeks after Duck's death. She would not speak until she had enough truth to speak without being dismissed, without being called emotional, without being waved off as a grieving mother who didn't understand the streets. She wanted facts. She wanted names. She wanted a timeline that matched what actually happened, not what the internet decided happened. That process took 3 years. And last week, it finally came to an end. A family friend revealed that Duck's mom had been receiving messages for months. Screenshots, voice notes, private DMs from people claiming to know details that never made it into any news article or courtroom. Most she ignored. Some she saved in a folder she never showed anyone. But one message, one specific detail that arrived on a Tuesday night, made her put her phone face down on the table, walk to her bedroom, close the door, and cry for 20 minutes straight. She didn't come out angry. She came out with a decision. And everyone who was in that house that night said you could see it on her face the moment she walked back into the room. She sat down in her living room, hands folded in her lap, and whispered, "So this is what they've been hiding all this time." Those words sent a chill through everyone present. Because it wasn't confusion in her voice. It wasn't shock. It was the quiet, settled tone of a woman who had suspected something for years, held that suspicion in her chest every single day, and just received the confirmation she always feared was eventually coming. The grief was still there. But now the grief had a shape. Now it had a direction. Before she posted a single word publicly, she made 3 phone calls. Not to family members, not to lawyers, not to anyone in the media. She called 3 people who had direct first-hand knowledge of the events surrounding August 4th, 2020. She didn't ask for opinions. She didn't ask for comfort. She asked specific questions, and she waited for specific answers. She was verifying, making absolutely sure that what she had been told wasn't another rumor, wasn't someone trying to manipulate a grieving mother for attention or clout or their own personal agenda. 2 of those 3 people were evasive. They talked around the questions, gave her generalities, tried to redirect the conversation toward healing and letting it rest. She listened politely and then ended both calls without saying much. But the third person, the third call, was different. That person didn't evade. That person answered every question she asked, calmly and directly, and when she was done asking, they said something that made her go silent for almost a full minute. "I should have told you this a long time ago. I'm sorry I didn't." When she hung up that phone, she stood up, walked to her window, and stared outside without saying a word for a long time. Then she picked her phone back up and started typing. The post she uploaded, and deleted within minutes, wasn't long. It wasn't a rant, it wasn't a list of accusations, it wasn't an emotional breakdown written in all caps at midnight. It was controlled, measured, and that made it hit harder than anything loud or dramatic ever could have. People who saw it before it disappeared say it read something close to this. "People keep acting like they know what happened to my son. But the story y'all been told is missing something important. And King Von's people know exactly what I'm talking about." Those two sentences detonated across Twitter, Reddit, TikTok, and YouTube within the hour. Fans lost their minds trying to decode it. What was missing from the story? What specifically did Von's people know? Was she implying the shooting wasn't random? Was she saying there was prior knowledge? Was she pointing at a setup? The speculation ran in every direction simultaneously. But what most people watching from the outside didn't understand was that she wasn't speaking carelessly or emotionally in that moment. Every single word she chose was deliberate, each one placed specifically to mean something to a specific person, someone who had been sitting comfortably for 3 years believing she would never find out what they knew. And the reason she finally had something to say wasn't just because new information found its way to her. It was because of one specific person who reached out from a number she didn't recognize on a Wednesday afternoon. This person had been carrying something for years, guilt that had been building quietly in the background of their life while the rest of the world moved on. They said they couldn't sleep anymore. They said that what people believed about that day online was not what actually happened, and that staying silent was starting to feel like participating in the lie. They reached out crying, not upset crying, but the kind of deep, exhausted crying that comes from holding something too heavy for too long. Their message said, "Ma'am, your son didn't walk into that randomly. Somebody made sure he would be there." Duck's mom read that sentence 3 times before she responded. Her hands were reportedly shaking by the time she typed back. She asked one question and one question only before anything else. Who? And what this person told her in the next several messages completely dismantled the version of events that had been accepted as the truth for 3 years. It didn't just add a detail to the existing story. It restructured the entire thing from the foundation up. And once she read it, there was no going back to not knowing. According to sources close to her, this person explained that what happened on Oak Street was not 2 crews randomly crossing paths on a busy Chicago afternoon. There was communication beforehand, real specific communication, about where Duck would be and when he would be there. There was someone feeding that information to the other side. Someone who knew Duck's movements, knew his plans for that day, and made sure that knowledge reached the right people well before he ever pulled up to that block. The shooting wasn't spontaneous. It was met. And the person who made that meeting possible was never charged, never investigated, never even mentioned publicly. Duck's mom sat with that information for a long time before she said anything out loud. She reportedly asked the person one more question. "Why are you telling me this now, after all this time?" And their answer was simple and devastating. "Because I was scared then. And now I'm more scared of what it means that I stayed quiet." That response told her everything she needed to know about the weight of what she had just been handed. This wasn't gossip. This wasn't someone looking for attention. This was a confession from someone who understood exactly what they had been complicit in by choosing silence, and who had finally decided they couldn't carry that anymore. She didn't react with rage. She didn't pick up the phone and start making threats. She didn't post immediately. She sat in her house that evening and she thought. She thought about Duck when he was young, before the music, before the fame, before any of this. She thought about phone calls and birthdays and the specific way he laughed at something he found genuinely funny. And then she thought about that afternoon, that sidewalk, that surveillance footage she had forced herself to watch once and never watched again. And she thought about the fact that somewhere out there, people who played a role in creating that moment were living their lives completely unbothered, because they had made the calculation that she would never know enough to be a problem. That calculation, she had just decided, was wrong. And by the time the sun went down that evening, the woman who had spent 3 years being the quietest person in this entire story had made up her mind to become the loudest. Not out of revenge. Not out of anger. But because her son's name had been attached to an incomplete story for long enough, and the people responsible for keeping it incomplete had been protected by her silence for long enough. That was over now. And part of what was about to come out involved King Von in a way that nobody outside of a very small circle had ever heard before. The next morning, she woke up before sunrise. She didn't reach for her phone right away, didn't check notifications, didn't look at what the internet was saying about her deleted post. She made coffee, sat at her kitchen table in the quiet, and started writing in a notebook, old school pen and paper, because she didn't trust digital anything right now, didn't want drafts saved somewhere, didn't want autocorrect changing her words or someone getting access to a notes app. She wrote by hand everything she knew, everything she had been told, every name, every date, every detail that didn't line up with the official story. She wrote for 2 hours without stopping. A family member who came downstairs midway through said she looked completely different from the woman who had been crying the night before. The grief was still there, it never goes anywhere, but sitting on top of it now was something else. A clarity. A resolve. The kind of expression you see on someone who has been lost for a long time and just found the road again. She acknowledged the family member with a nod, kept writing, and didn't explain what she was doing. She didn't have to. The room understood that something had shifted permanently. Later that morning, she made another call. This one was different from the 3 verification calls the night before. This time she called someone who had physically been present on Oak Street that afternoon. Someone who had given a statement to police. Someone who had said publicly that the chaos happened too fast and they didn't see anything clearly. When that person picked up and heard her voice, there was a pause on the line that lasted just a beat too long. The kind of pause that tells you everything before a single word is spoken. They already knew why she was calling. They had been waiting for this call for 3 years. "I need you to tell me what you actually saw," she said. "Not what you told the detectives. Not what you put on social media afterward. What you saw with your own eyes, in your own words right now." The person on the other end was quiet for several seconds. Then they said, "Auntie, I don't know if," and she cut them off before the sentence could finish. "You're going to tell me today," she said. Not loudly. Not aggressively. Just with the kind of flat certainty that makes it clear that the conversation is no longer optional. There was another silence, longer this time. And then they started talking. What this witness described was not about the gunshots themselves. It was about the 10 to 15 minutes before everything happened. A window of time that no blog, no documentary, no court testimony had ever examined in any real detail. They told her about a black SUV that came down the street, slowed down, then kept moving, circled the block and came back a second time before it finally stopped. They described the way the men who stepped out moved, unhurried, deliberate, scanning the environment with a calm of people who had already decided what was going to happen and were simply executing a plan they had rehearsed. They told her about a phone call. One of the men received a call on his cell phone seconds before stepping out of that vehicle, nodded once at whoever was in the driver's seat, and then moved forward. That detail, the phone call, the nod, the timing, meant something specific. It meant someone on the other end of that call was coordinating the moment in real time. Someone who wasn't standing on that street. Someone who was somewhere else entirely, somewhere with distance and deniability, giving a signal that said, "Now." And Duck's mom, sitting at her kitchen table with a pen in her hand, wrote that detail down and underlined it twice. The witness also told her about a figure she had never heard mentioned before, someone standing at the far end of the block, away from immediate action, who watched everything unfold from a distance and then turned and walked in the opposite direction before the siren started. Not running. Walking. Calmly, deliberately, like someone leaving a location they had only come to observe. This person was never caught on the main surveillance footage that circulated online. They were on a different camera angle, one the public never saw, one that apparently disappeared somewhere between the crime scene and the courtroom. Duck's mom listened to all of it without making a sound. When the witness finally stopped talking, she thanked them quietly and ended the call. Then she sat back in her chair and closed her eyes for a long moment. A family member in the room said she stayed like that for almost 3 full minutes, completely still, completely silent, before she opened her eyes, picked up her pen, and kept writing. She didn't cry this time. She was past that now. She was in a different mode entirely. The mode of a woman building something, organizing something, preparing to present something that could not be ignored or dismissed or explained away. What she was assembling, piece by piece, was a timeline. A real one. Not the version that had been constructed by media coverage and social media narratives and lawyers with motives, but a timeline built from the accounts of people who were physically present, who had first-hand knowledge, who had stayed silent for various reasons and were now, one by one, telling her what they actually knew. And the timeline she was building had a name running through it that the public had never fully examined in this context. Not as a shooter. Not as someone who gave a direct order. But as someone who had knowledge, specific, advanced knowledge, and made a choice about what to do with it. That afternoon, a second person contacted her unsolicited. This was someone from inside the music industry. Not a rapper, not a manager, but someone who moved in and out of both camps professionally and had maintained careful public neutrality since the day of the shooting. This person had never spoken to her directly before. They reached out through a mutual contact and asked if she was willing to hear something that had been weighing on them. She said yes. They got on a call within the hour. What this person told her was not about logistics. It was about the social atmosphere in the weeks leading up to August 4th. They described conversations, at shows, in recording studios, in group chats, in the kind of informal settings where people say things they would never say on the record, where Duck's name had been coming up repeatedly. Not in the context of music. Not in the context of beef that was being publicly acknowledged. In a more specific, more personal, more targeted context. People were talking about Duck in ways that went beyond rap rivalry. And those conversations, this person told her, were happening in spaces where King Von was present and participating. She asked the question directly, "Are you saying Von knew something was being planned?" The person on the other end paused. Then said, "I'm saying the conversations I heard weren't the conversations of people who expected things to stay peaceful. And Von wasn't sitting outside of those conversations. He was in them." That was the line that hit her the hardest. Not an accusation of direct involvement. Something in some ways more painful than that. The picture of a situation where the people around her son were already being discussed as targets, where the temperature was already being turned up deliberately, and where someone who later became one of the most celebrated names in drill music was present in the rooms where that was happening. She ended the call, put her phone face down, and sat quietly for a long time. Then she said something that the family member in the room has repeated to several people since. "My son didn't know he was walking into something that was already decided." Not a question. A statement. Said with the flat, exhausted certainty of someone who has just watched a story they already knew the ending of finally reveal its beginning. And the beginning was uglier, and more deliberate, and involved more names than the ending ever suggested. By early evening, word had started spreading through certain circles that Duck's mom was talking to people, asking questions, putting things together. The phones of people connected to that world started lighting up. Texts were sent. Calls were made. Someone apparently tried to reach the first witness she had spoken to that morning. The person who described the SUV, the phone call, the figure at the end of the block, and that person stopped responding to messages shortly after. Whether that was coincidence or something else, Duck's mom noted it. She wrote it down. It went into the notebook with everything else. Because she understood something that the people scrambling on the other end of those calls apparently didn't. She wasn't doing this impulsively. She wasn't acting on emotion. She had spent 3 years building the patience and the discipline for exactly this moment. The moment when enough pieces were finally in her hands to put the picture together. And now that she had them, she wasn't going to rush. She was going to be thorough. She was going to be careful. And when she finally spoke publicly, really spoke fully and completely, there would be nothing left to dismiss, nothing left to spin, nothing left to bury. Part of that picture was already drawn. And the part with King Von's name on it was about to become impossible to ignore. That evening, someone showed up at her door unannounced. Not a stranger, someone she had known for years, someone connected to Duck's world, someone who had been at the funeral and had checked in on her periodically in the months afterward. When she opened the door, She didn't say anything. She just looked at them. They stepped inside, head low, and said, "I heard you've been asking questions." She closed the door behind them, walked back to her kitchen table, sat down, and said, "Then you already know why you're here." What this person told her over the next hour was not entirely new. Some of it confirmed things she had already been told, filled in gaps she had already suspected. But one detail was new. One specific piece of information that this person had held onto for 3 years because they were afraid of what sharing it would mean for their own safety, their own relationships, their own position in the circles they moved in. They shared it now because they had seen her post, seen it deleted, watched the internet react, and understood that the process she had started was not going to stop. Better to tell her themselves than to have her find out another way. The detail involved a conversation that happened approximately 2 weeks before August 4th. A conversation where Duck's location patterns were discussed, where he spent time, what routes he used, what blocks he was comfortable on. A conversation where that information was shared deliberately with people who had no innocent reason to want it. And a conversation where King Von was not just present as a passive listener, but had contributed specific information. Information about Duck that he would have only known through their overlapping circles and mutual connections in the Chicago scene. Duck's mom listened to every word. When the person finished, the room was completely silent. Then she asked, "Did anyone tell Duck? Did anyone warn him?" The person shook their head slowly. "People were scared," they said. "And some people thought it wouldn't actually go that far." She nodded once, slowly, and then said something that has stayed with the people who heard it ever since. So everyone knew except the one person whose life was in danger. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't slam her hand on the table. She just said it like a fact that she was settling into, the way you settle into news that is devastating but no longer surprising. After the person left, she went back to her notebook. She was not writing in bullet points or fragments anymore. She was writing in full paragraphs, the way someone writes when they are preparing to speak publicly, when they are shaping raw information into something that can be understood by people who weren't there and don't know the context. She was building her statement. Not a social media post. Not a quick video. A full, detailed, documented account of what she now knew, who was involved in what capacity, and how each piece connected to the next. She wrote until nearly midnight. Meanwhile, in the hours since her deleted post had spread, the online landscape had become completely chaotic. King Von's name was attached to every trending hashtag related to the story. His fans were defensive and loud, flooding comment sections with arguments about his legacy, his innocence, his death, the unfairness of blaming someone who couldn't defend himself. Duck's fans were equally loud in the other direction, saying this was the confirmation they had always believed was coming, that the timeline had always pointed in this direction, that the truth had always been an open secret to people paying attention. Neither side had the actual information. Both sides were arguing loudly and passionately about a story whose most important chapter hadn't even been told yet. Duck's mom was aware of all of it and engaging with none of it. She had specifically asked the people around her not to respond to anything online on her behalf, not to share the post, not to add commentary. She wanted the conversation to stay at exactly the temperature it was at, simmering, widespread, impossible to ignore, until she was ready to turn the heat all the way up herself. People in her circle described it as the most disciplined they had ever seen her. The grief that usually lived on the surface of everything she did in public had gone somewhere internal. What was visible now was focus. The following morning brought one more unexpected development. A message came to her from someone she had never communicated with directly before, someone from King Von's side of this story. Not a close friend, not a family member, but someone who existed in that orbit and had access to information from that perspective. The message was not an attack, and it was not a defense. It was an acknowledgement. It said, "Ma'am, I know what you've been finding out. And I want you to know that not everyone over here is comfortable with how this story has been told either." She read it twice. Then she set her phone down and didn't respond immediately. She thought about that message for several hours. Because it told her something important, not just about the information she had gathered, but about the landscape she was about to step into publicly. If people from Von's own circle were quietly acknowledging that the narrative had been shaped and managed, that meant the cover story had never been as solid as it appeared from the outside. It meant there were fractures. It meant that when she spoke, she would not be speaking alone against a unified front. She would be speaking into a space where the truth was already an open secret among the people who actually knew, and had simply never been given oxygen in public because nobody withstanding had been willing to light the match. She was willing. That afternoon, she sat with her closest friend, someone who had known her since before Duck was born, someone who had been beside her through every stage of this nightmare, and she read parts of what she had written aloud. Not all of it. Enough. When she finished, her friend sat quietly for a moment and then said, "Are you sure you're ready for what happens after you say this?" Duck's mom looked up from the notebook and said, "I've been ready for 3 years. I just didn't have everything I needed." Her friend nodded. "Then it's time," she said. And that was the last conversation she had about it before she decided on her next step. She didn't release the full statement that night. She made a strategic decision, one that surprised the people who expected an emotional, immediate explosion. Instead, she posted a single quiet line that she did not delete. It stayed up. It was visible to everyone. And it said more in its restraint than any long post could have said in its length. "I know everything now. And the truth involves more than one name. No hashtags. No tagging. No explanation. Just that, and then silence." Within 4 hours it had been screenshotted and shared hundreds of thousands of times across every platform. Within 6 hours, it was the most discussed sentence in the drill community online. The reason it landed so hard was not what it said. It was what it implied. More than one name meant the conversation was bigger than any single person. It meant the narrative that had been constructed around a single shooter, a single moment of street violence, a single decision made in a split second on a Chicago sidewalk. That narrative was incomplete by design, not by accident. Someone had built that incomplete version of the story deliberately. Someone had made sure the frame stayed small so the larger picture stayed hidden. And the woman who had spent 3 years in the background, grieving quietly and watching carefully, had now stepped forward to say, "I see the larger picture. And I'm going to show it to everyone." People who tried to reach her that night found her phone going to voicemail. People who came to her house were not let in. She had gone quiet again, but this time the silence was completely different from the silence of the past 3 years. This was not the silence of someone overwhelmed by grief, managing their pain day by day, waiting for some version of peace to find them. This was the silence of someone who was ready. Someone who had done the work, gathered the evidence, built the case, and was now simply choosing the right moment to deliver it. And everyone who knew her, on every side of this story, understood that the moment was coming soon. Because this was never really about the internet, or the streams, or the legacy debates between fan bases on social media. This was about a woman who watched her son get buried and then spent 3 years being fed an incomplete story by people who were protecting themselves. This was about the specific, unbearable cruelty of grieving someone while simultaneously being denied the truth about what actually happened to them. She had lived inside that cruelty for 3 years. She was done living inside it. And when she finally spoke, fully, completely, with everything she had gathered in that notebook, and in those phone calls, and in those quiet nights of putting the pieces together, the story that had been told about FBG Duck's death was never going to be the same again. Not the version on the blogs. Not the version from the trial. And especially not the version that had, until now, kept King Von's name safely on the outside of a circle it had always been inside.